Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 16th episode of the iDebate server. I'm the moderator for tonight's debate, Resident Evie, and the topic will be, should physician-assisted suicide be legalized? Arguing in the affirmative is the iFunny user with interest piqued in both animal and human behavior, EvolutionaryResearch. And arguing in the negative is another iFunny user, the Michigander who's probably drinking Vernors right now, RadRhys. Each debater will be given a 5-minute opening argument. Then, they will have 20 minutes of open dialogue, asking each other questions with as minimal interruptions as possible. After the dialogue, they will offer a 5-minute closing. This will conclude the debate, at which point we will allow audience members to connect and ask one question per user to the debaters. The debaters will only answer questions they are directly asked, so if you wish to hear from both people, make sure to address them both. The Q&A will last 30 minutes or until there are no more questions. After this 30 minutes has expired, the recording will stop, so any further discussion between the debaters or the audience will not be included in the YouTube upload. The rules are quite simple. The debaters will not be allowed to go over time during the opening or they will be muted. The open dialogue will be as free as possible, and while the debaters are restricted from directly insulting one another at any point during the exchange, profanity will not be censored as long as it is not used gratuitously. If the conversation between the debaters becomes incoherent, I, the moderator, will intervene to bring the point back at hand. And the closing will also last for no more than 5 minutes, or the debater will be muted. During each phase of the debate, I will let the debaters know when they have 1 minute left, 30 seconds left, and 10 seconds left, and if they are still talking after their time expires, they will be muted and we will move on to the next phase. The audience is allowed to utilize the debate text chat to fact-check the debaters and deliberate the topic among themselves. However, you will not be allowed to connect until the Q&A, at which point a queue will be initiated for you to join if you wish to ask a question. Now, if both debaters understand and agree to the rules, we will go ahead and begin. Evolutionary Research, since you are arguing in the affirmative of this motion this evening, you will be giving your opening argument first. You may start whenever you are ready.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Perfect. You often hear people describe themselves as pro-choice. That choice typically only revolved around the ability of a mother or would-be mother to bring life into this world or not. You will rarely, if at all, hear the phrase pro-choice be used in reference to the taking of a life. A woman's choice whether or not to create or halt new life. Should that same woman or her parents or their friends not have the choice to halt their own? You could argue that anyone, man or woman, has the means of ceasing their existence. After all, it would only take a single bullet, a sturdy rope, or perhaps a fistful of pills, would it not? It may seem simple, however, the statistics would disagree. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, for every single suicide attempt that ends in death, there are 11 non-fatal attempts. If you ask the American Association of Suicidology, a non-profit organization dedicated to the study of suicide and patients who attempt it, pardon me, that number increases from 11 to 25 for every successful attempt. Regardless of which number you choose to follow, that's still roughly 93.5% of all attempted suicides ending in failure. You could choose to look at these statistics and go, that means they don't succeed, they get help, that's good. But you should consider that just because one does not die does not mean they have not been horribly wounded, if not crippled. According to the Center for Disease Control and the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, the most common two methods of suicide amongst men and women of all ages are by firearm or suffocation, with more than half of all attempts being carried out by the former. If we compare the statistics of how many attempts fail, and by what means the attempts are carried out, we're painted a grim image of injured men and women, left mentally handicapped, physically crippled, or worse. With the suicide rate on the rise and no show of it slowing, why allow innocent Americans to injure themselves in horrific ways? You cannot stop a man from having control of his own life. In my eyes, at least, that's a greater infringement of freedom than any other. But we have the means to allow those burdened by mental and physical illness alike to peacefully, safely, and absolutely cease their own suffering. So I ask, why don't we allow nationwide physician assisted suicide?
Are you all set?
Yep.
Alrighty. We'll add 2 minutes to the open dialogue. And Rad, whenever you're ready.
Am I loud and clear?
You are loud and clear.
All right. I will keep this as short as possible. Um, I would like to establish that assisted suicide is not only healthy for society and ultimately is not beneficial to the patients that it's meant to help in the first place, but it can and will disproportionately affect the poor. Um, every study I have ever found, and I will provide sources in the debate text chat later, every study I have found um, points towards suicide and depression disproportionately affecting the poor. Um, something of note, aside from that, is that suicide is also extremely common among doctors. I believe the rate is double. I do not have the figures. I apologize for that. Uh, sorry, I can't read this. Yes, it's almost double. You can't physically stop a man attempting suicide if I'm very sorry, my dog. Could you cut over this? I need to do something with my dog. I'm sorry. He's gonna be locked in the bathroom for an hour. Sorry for that. As I said, it hurts the poor, it hurts the doctors, and it also hurts society as a whole. Suicides, much like spree killings, tend to be clustered. If one person commits suicide, that idea propagates and causes others to ponder the idea. And if they ponder it, some of those people will be attempting. And doctors repeatedly report that they are emotionally abused by their patients for demanding assisted suicide. They can be harassed, and I would argue, which I believe is completely fair to argue, that that contributes to their suicide rates, which are extremely high. To keep this short, I would like to close that off.
All right. Thank you, Rad. And we're going to open up the open dialogue. And because of the extra time with the two of you, it's going to be about 25 minutes. You can start whenever you'd like.
Okay, so your pro-choice thing, that reminds me a lot of like what people. Wait, he's not. Okay, now he's unmuted. That reminds me a lot of what people call death with dignity, um, which I've actually had to do a lot of research for, and I've prepared an argument for that. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Aware of like the death with dignity arguments and like how it could be similar to what you said?
I'm familiar with the term, but of course, I'm sure you wouldn't mind elaborating on
Yeah,
it.
that's probably best for the audience. They're the ones watching anyway. Essentially, it states that well, usually it's reserved for people who have terminal illnesses Um, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Death with dignity is, hold on, let me pull up my thing. It's a thing that allows people to commit suicide without having to deal with the consequences of whatever condition they may have in a way that could be disfiguring, such as like ALS, um, or deal with extreme pain, perhaps physical, like a burn survivor, or mental, like someone with a severely uh, bad case of depression. Though usually I don't see people argue in favor of the depression one. Do you?
Yeah, I would like to argue in favor of the depression or clinical depression.
And
I'm
not
familiar
necessarily.
with the
Sorry.
term, obviously. Die with dignity. I haven't heard it used. I didn't know that was the official name of it. Um, I am aware that it is implemented currently in 9 states. Well, DC doesn't count as a state, but it's in 9 areas. It's implemented in 9 areas. I believe it's Oregon, Michigan. Is it Michigan?
I'm not.
Hawaii, New Jersey is one of them. As I said, DC. And like you said, they're normally reserved for people with terminal illnesses, things that will only progress in a negative way. I would like to argue that major depression can or should be considered one of those arguments, one of those illnesses. According to a study ran by the National Institute of Mental Health in 2017, 13.1% of young adults aged 18 to 25 suffered at least one major depressive episode, described as a bout of depression related symptoms that lasted a week or longer every couple of months. Um, Not to make it personal, but as someone who has suffered through depression for a good amount of my life, it's not something that you exactly just cure. Unlike other illnesses, mental illnesses don't exactly just go away most of the time. Everyone can feel down, everyone can feel depressed, but there's a difference between, say, like grief related depression, which is normally caused by the loss of a loved one, and clinical depression, which is often the result of a head injury, a birth defect, chemical imbalances. Those can't exactly be treated, or they can be treated, but they can't be cured. The symptoms can be lessened, but just like a terminal illness, you can never be rid of it. And I'd argue that in some individuals, not all, rather than let them go and horribly mangle themselves, allow them to peacefully induce their own death through either an injection or a lethal dosage of medication. Don't let someone become a cripple. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but don't let them paralyze themselves horribly or even blast half their face away just to be left in a horrendous state of disrepair with depression.
I would object to. I would. Okay, so your use of major depressive disorder, there are many depressive disorders such as minor depressive disorder, major, persistent. Um, Major usually does not last for an entire lifetime. If it does get to that point, it will be usually considered persistent depressive disorder. Regardless of the disorder, um, everything can be treated. And unfortunately, if we don't treat it, if we take the easy route of, well, essentially, I would argue what is negligent homicide and is negligent homicide in many states, um, we are not only destroying those patients' lives, which you might argue are already destroyed, but it can certainly get worse. And by doing this, it is worse because the life is over. Anyway, back to the point. Hold on, I had something written. I apologize. Could you repeat the last thing you said?
Um, last thing I said. Uh, if I'm honest with you, I don't remember myself.
Aw, shoot, I remember something. I think I accidentally cut it over. Regardless, focusing on the suicide thing, essentially causing other people to commit suicide. Um, it was from the economic research publications. Um, sorry, that's the poor one. Um, I'm very sorry. It was from the CDC. Um, Suicides tend to be clustered. If someone were to commit suicide, their friends and family are at an increased risk of committing suicide, and not just their friends and family, but people in their communities. I do not have. If you have a reason to argue against it, I would like it, but I cannot think of a reason why assisted suicide wouldn't increase the risk of suicide among family members and loved ones and community members.
I would argue that it really comes down to a social view of suicide. In our current state in America, we've come to the decision that suicide, no matter what, is always either considered selfish or grim. And it is, it's death. It should be treated as a serious, grim topic. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to an individual's choice. Um, I would argue that suicide clusters. I argue that in families, it could also be the underlying. What's the word here? It could the cause may not necessarily be the death of another, but it could be an underlying issue. As with most cases with mental illness, it can run in the family. I'm not saying everyone who chooses to end themselves because of death of a loved one is automatically mentally ill. Um, but I feel like if we can change the way that we as a culture view assisted suicide by your own choice, um, it wouldn't be as bad. I feel like it shouldn't be something that you treat lightly, of course. I do the same thing with abortion. It's not something you just say, hey, look at that. But it should always be an option. Because at the end of the day, that's a human life, and if we don't have control of our own lives, what do we have? Um,
Well, at the end of the day, it's exactly like you said. It's a human life. And the whole point of medicine in the first place, um, the ultimate thing that it revolves around is prevention. Um, Unless you change the culture, which I would love to hear how you could do that, but that would tap into broader like sociological things that I'm not sure are all within the bounds of this conversation. But shoot, I always forget where I am. Oh yeah, the penultimate goal of medicine is to cure. Um, and I think we can both argue that this doesn't cure the underlying problems that are really causing the desire for suicide in the first place. Would you? Like,
um,
does this
I
address the
wouldn't say it cures the problem, the cause. No. But if you look at most of medicine, we don't really treat the cause a lot of the time, do we? We treat a symptom. Um, I feel like you can't really eliminate the cause of depression because there are so many variables that can cause it. Uh, the chemistry makeup of each human is so unique to their own that
That's not necessarily true. Necessarily true. I am of the, I guess, school that believes depression is primarily environmental. Really, your entire being is environmental, um, and that influences how your, well, your brain, which is you, responds to stimuli. And I'm sorry, I keep forgetting where I'm things.
You're fine.
And anyway, on to the third reason of medicine. It's treating, which you've tapped into a little bit. Are we really treating the problem of depression and, well, the feelings of hopelessness that, well, would have to exist in order for someone to want to commit suicide in, well, any situation really? Are we really treating that in the best way possible?
I would
You
say
argue
no,
that,
we aren't really treating that. Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
well, I didn't get an answer immediately, but is this the best possible thing that we can do for someone rather than, say, um, force treatment on someone, which is necessary in this situation? We just let them have what they want and essentially take part in killing them.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's taking part in killing them.
I
I'd
only
say it's,
mean taking part. I don't mean actually killing them.
well, of
Like
course.
ignore any like connotation that
Yeah,
carry.
no, I get that, but you did mention before that you would call that, what was it, negligent homicide, I believe you said?
Yes.
I wouldn't say it classifies as that, because at the end of the day, the only thing you classify that is the law, and the law can change with the simplest thing.
Well, negligent homicide is a legal term, so
Yeah, exactly. So at the end of the day, that can mean whatever is decided by the law. Um, to counter what you said, that the three reasons of medicine, it was to prevent, to treat, and what was the third one?
to prevent, then cure, then treat.
That was it. Prevent, cure, then
Descending order
treat.
of importance.
Um, let me pull up some statistics here. If one of the main causes of medicine is to prevent, well, according to the Suicide Prevention Research Center, as I said in my opening, the main causes or main suicide methods among both men and women are firearms and suffocation as the top two.
Objection.
All right.
Serious objection. You're looking at what the people are doing rather than like why they're doing it. Prevention would address why they're doing it in the first place and stopping that situation from arising.
That's why I was going to go into a bit of a side here with that.
Sorry.
If the main cause, if one of the main reasons for medicine is to prevent, I'd argue that preventing these horrible disfigurations and paralyzations that can be caused by botched suicide attempts, that would be in one way helping people. I'm not saying we shouldn't treat it. I'm not saying doctors should offer that right away, but at the end of the day, there are always going to be people committing suicide. And I feel like this would be a safe way to tell them, or a safe way to let them do that without risking the chance, or with a greatly decreased chance of horribly mangling themselves. I don't feel like, obviously depression can be caused by environmental outside factors. I mentioned grief-related depression. Um, there are several things that could cause that. Uh, environmental-related depression, but there's a lot of evidence to show that some people are just unfortunately born with it. It's
Environmental factors does not necessarily mean that it's a specific event that causes it. Like people
I
can
know.
certainly be predisposed to depression, either genetically, like my mother had depression, my cousin had depression, I have depression. Like that is likely not a coincidence. Um, uh, but it is ultimately everything really is ultimately down to the environment that you're raised in, how you are essentially trained to respond to stimuli. And it's especially important at a young age. I do not have my source for this, but I think this is reasonable to accept. Younger individuals have the highest suicide attempt rate, um, and older individuals have the highest suicide success rate. Then it's middle-aged, they have the highest, the highest total number of suicide. So if we were to legalize assisted suicide, especially for depression and other mental disorders, that would predominantly affect younger people. They have the lowest success rate for suicide. Okay, so like you do accept like the thing that I said?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I accept it fully.
I just wanted to clarify that. And again, this is one I sent the source for. It is from the economic research publication. Poor people are more likely to commit suicide and attempt suicide for that matter.
I'm sorry, which is that one of the links that you sent in here? There it is. From the CDC, yes?
Hold on. From the CDC, the poor, the poor are less likely to get treatment and are more likely to get depression. It's right underneath. Or more likely.
Okay, yeah. From the FRBS. Okay, let me just read over that real quick.
Well, I mean, that was mostly like so people could verify if it's actually true.
Yeah, I know. I like to read over some of these things.
I mean, it's a nice thing, but like we're in the middle of a debate, so.
No, I'm just listening to you while I go over it, multitasking.
And going into the CDC source that I gave, because the poor are less likely to get treatment for depression, it's likely that their suicide rate, they are more likely to get assisted suicide. I don't know how to describe that.
I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say they're more likely to
they're more likely to get
out
something cheaper like that than a long-term cost of psychological therapy, medication, potentially things that would change the environment around them to help them cope with that.
I would, at that point, we get into a whole other debate about how healthcare should be more readily available to the poor.
Well, I think we're both in favor of that already, so it's not.
Yeah, so that's kind of pointless at that point. I definitely see where you're coming from, and that would definitely put the lower class at a extreme disadvantage. But at the same time, that's like saying, well, we should ban guns because the lower class are more likely to shoot themselves. It's just an infringement of another right, and I just don't feel that in any way should that be allowed. What does the Constitution say, or is it the Bill of Rights? Pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. I feel like if one cannot,
it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Happiness is like the more common one you hear about, but it's not like I consider.
But it's not directly in there. Okay, okay. But regardless, I still feel that in any way, if you infringe upon someone's right to take their own life, then that is not to look at from an almost religious perspective, because that could easily lead into a religious debate. If you're going to take away someone's ability to safely pursue their own safely pursue their own happiness, then what's stopping you from taking away any of a right? What's stopping you from just marking someone with a stamp and saying that they're a number, that they don't have control over their own existence anymore?
What we're supposed to do is look at let's look at guns. Guns serve a purpose. They can be used for protection, they can be used for entertainment. Um, oh boy, are they entertaining. Sorry. uh, they can be used simply for discipline training, which is useful in its own right. Yeah, guns are neat. Um,
100%.
uh, Sorry, I just read something and agreed with it
I
from
did
the
too.
chat. Ignore that. Um, but guns are the scope of this conversation, so I'm not going to argue in favor or against. I'm just saying that guns do serve a purpose outside, well, suicide and the like. Um, anyway, on to the suicide. Um, I apologize. I had something in mind and I wanted to say it so bad, but it left the tip of my tongue. What was the last thing you said? Or what was the point that you gave?
I basically said that preventing someone from safely seeking their own death can
This
be
is
interpreted as preventing them from pursuing their own happiness.
this was actually in my um I really wanted to drive this one home in my opening statement. Um uh I have three statements that I emphasized. Assisted suicide hurts the poor, it hurts doctors, and society as a whole. It isn't safe. It isn't necessarily safe for doctors because they repeatedly report harassment from their patients and really intimidated. They're intimidated into doing it as much as someone could be intimidated by, well, a patient. They're most likely sick in some way. Um, so that is not good for these doctors. And again, with the clustering nature of suicides, like suicides cause other suicides. Um, uh, it is
I'm gonna let you guys know you got about a
it is
minute left.
essentially your actions of trying to commit suicide are harming others, even if it's not directly harming others. It is harming others. Suicide, we the debate isn't about suicide; it's about assisted suicide. But this applies here as well.
Um,
30
again,
seconds.
that goes back to my point about as a culture see suicide and death as a whole. Um, I feel like that we shouldn't view death as not to be religious and end all be all. Even if we do, we shouldn't view it as the worst thing ever because at the end of the day, that's the natural way of life.
10
Every life
seconds.
begins, every life ends. Regardless of how long you're here, you only get one lifetime. So I feel like the way, and we can sit and talk about, oh, we can change society any way you like, but I really feel like that we should change the way we view death as a whole,
Time is up.
not see it the end of a life, but we should view it as a celebration.
I'm muting you. Your time is
Well,
up.
regardless,
I'm muting you both. Your time is up. All right. So Rad is gonna do his closing first. Let me know when you're ready.
what's going on here?
The opening discussion is over.
Does anyone know what's going on here?
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay,
Can
that's
you hear me?
technical issues probably.
Can you hear me?
Um,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Oh, I'm really sorry
What just
about
happened?
that. My mic
And why?
apparently left off Discord. I was giving you guys 1 minute warnings. I gave you a 10-minute warning, and then I muted you both when your time was up.
I didn't get a warning.
I apologize for that. I guess apparently somehow Discord stopped working for me. Okay, I'm trying to get back into this. Are you ready for your closing?
I guess. I don't know why I'm not muted and he is.
Oh, because your closing is...
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I should probably give it now, shouldn't I?
Yes.
In conclusion, no. In conclusion, again, I reiterate my 3 points. Side hurts the poor, hurts doctors, and hurts society as a whole. I believe I gave sufficient evidence to suggest this, and it was acknowledged by my opponent. And I do not believe that someone's, well, supposed right to end their life uh, should be allowed when the harm is too significant to ignore. And really, I believe it's too significant to ignore. And that's what this debate, in my eyes, is about. So I believe that's all I need to say.
That's all for your closing?
Yeah, I want to get this over with as quickly as possible.
Okay. Evolutionary, you're up. Let me know when you're ready.
Yep. Ready now.
Go ahead.
I'd like to say that I provided enough evidence to argue my side. Admittedly, my view is a lot more emotional than statistical. But I would still like to walk away from this and say that you should not be able to remove someone's right to safely make their own decision on their own life. Uh, at the end of the day, it's just the way we view suicide and death as a whole that I feel would cause most of these issues my opponent has brought up. But we can't really just change culture overnight, can we? I'd like to say that regardless of what society views of it, assisted suicide, physician assisted suicide, is the safest way to go because there will always be, regardless of how we treat it, regardless of how we view mental health, there will always be people seeking to end their own lives. And it's our responsibility to allow them to do that as safely and humanely as possible.
Is that the end of your closing?
Yep.
Alrighty. We're setting up the queue right now for questions. I want to thank you guys both. You guys have been amazing, and this has been a nice little mini debate. In the meantime, if someone has a question right now, let me know in the voice chat, and then we can get you up on there. Or let me know in the text chat. I'm sorry about that. Oh, now it's up. I will set a timer for 30 minutes for the debate, for the questions. But if there are no questions, we will move on. The queue is ready. You can join at any point in time using that little check mark emoji. I have a question for Evolutionary, even though I'm the moderator, so I'm going to unmute Evolutionary so that he can answer this question for me. Do you believe that there should be any qualifications before you receive assisted suicide? Like, should you have to go through a psychologist? Should you have to go into a doctor and get confirmed for something? What do you believe?
I believe that you should be able to provide proof that you've sought every other possible treatment and cure, that you've been on at least 2 different types of medication, that you've sought therapeutic help for at the very least, I'd say, a year and a half. You shouldn't just be able to walk in and say, "Hey, can you kill me?" There should definitely be some type of qualifications. I think the same thing with other heavy medical procedures. Uh, definitely you have to have at least seeked other options before you decide that this is it, I want to end it.
Thank you very much. Our next question is going to be... Nope, never mind. I don't think we have any more questions. We can give it another minute. If not, thank you guys all for coming, and it's been amazing. Thank you for sharing both of your sides. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time.